Hey guys, tonight we slip into the dusty workshops of Ottoman clockmakers, where sand trickles through glass and water drips in steady hypnotic rhythm. Picture yourself in a dimly lit room, the air thick with the scent of molten glass and cedar. You're crouched beside a craftsman, his fingers steady as he funnels golden sand into a delicate hourglass. The world outside hums with Istanbul's chaos, vendors shouting, donkeys braying. But in here, time moves only as fast as the grains fall. You probably won't survive this without feeling a little mesmerized by the patience it takes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're chilling tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, where time isn't just a number, it's a craft, a ritual, almost a spell. Sand clocks, or hourglasses as you might call them, were the rock stars of timekeeping here. They weren't just tools, they were symbols of life's fleeting nature. You watch a clockmaker tilt the glass bulb, letting fine sand pour through a tiny neck, each grain chosen for its size and weight. This isn't some slapdash operation. Ottoman clockmakers were obsessive about precision. A single misjudged grain could throw off the count, and nobody wants to mess up the Sultan's schedule. Historical records show that by the 16th century, these sand timers were standard in mosques and palaces, ensuring prayers and meetings stayed on track. But here's the quirky bit. Some clockmakers swore by using sand from specific deserts, claiming certain grains flowed smoother. No joke. There were debates about whether Red Sea sand beat Anatolian dust. You can imagine them arguing in the bazaar, holding up hourglasses like they're fine wine. Historians still argue whether these sand preferences were practical or just superstition, but you can't deny the vibe. You're holding one now, the glass cool in your hands, watching the sand pile up at the bottom. It's hypnotic, right? Each grain feels like a heartbeat, steady and unhurried. The process starts with the glass itself. You're in a workshop where artisans blow molten glass into perfect bulbs, their cheeks puffed out like they're auditioning for a jazz band. The sand has to be sifted obsessively, sometimes for days, to ensure uniformity. Too coarse and it clogs, too fine and it slips through too fast. You can almost hear the clockmaker muttering, "This batch is garbage," as he tosses out a pile. The neck of the hourglass, that tiny choke point, is the real magic. It's measured to the micrometer, well, the Ottoman equivalent anyway. A good clockmaker could make an hourglass run for exactly 60 minutes, no more, no less. You're starting to get why this matters. In a world without digital clocks or even reliable mechanical ones, sand was the ultimate referee. It didn't care if you were a sultan or a street vendor, it just kept falling. But don't get too cozy. Sand clocks weren't perfect. Humidity could make the grains stick, and a clumsy apprentice could shatter the glass. You wince imagining the poor guy who dropped the Sultan's favorite timer, bet he didn't get a second chance. Still, these devices were everywhere, from scholars timing debates to cooks timing their pilaf. You're already wondering how they kept it all together, aren't you?
You're still in the heart of an Ottoman workshop. The faint clink of glass lingering as you shift your gaze to a different corner. Here, water clocks, clepsydras if you want to sound fancy, steal the show. Picture a bronze basin, etched with swirling patterns, filled with water that drips through a tiny hole into another vessel below. You lean closer, mesmerized by the steady plop, 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 each drop marking a moment in time. It's like nature itself is keeping score. The air feels cooler here, maybe from the water's presence, and you can't help but wonder how something so simple could rule an empire's rhythm. These water clocks were no small deal. By the 15th century, they were a staple in Ottoman courts, especially for nighttime use, when sundials were useless. You imagine a palace scribe, bleary-eyed, checking the water level to record the hour of a royal decree. The system was elegant. Water flows at a constant rate, and markers on the receiving vessel show how much time has passed. But don't let the simplicity fool you. It's a high-stakes game. A single leak could ruin the count, and you're picturing a frantic apprentice plugging a hole with his finger, praying nobody notices. Here's the oddball tidbit. Some water clocks used scented oils floating on the surface to mark time. As the water drained, the oil level dropped, leaving a fragrant trail. Imagine timing your day by the smell of rose or sandalwood. You'd probably feel like a poet, not a bureaucrat. Historians still argue whether these scented clocks were practical or just a flex for wealthy patrons, but you're secretly hoping it's the latter. Who wouldn't want their clock to double as an air freshener? You're watching a clockmaker now, his brow furrowed as he adjusts the drip rate, muttering about flow harmony. It's almost comical how intense he is, like he's diffusing a bomb. The water has to be pure, no grit, no algae, or it'll clog the system. You catch a whiff of the damp stone floor and feel the weight of the room's quiet focus. Every drop matters, and you're starting to respect the grind. The clockmaker tests the flow, counting silently, his lips moving like he's reciting a prayer. When he nods, you know he's nailed it. But it's not just about mechanics. Water clocks carried a vibe, a kind of poetic weight. You think about how water, like time, never stops moving. The Ottomans got that. They used these clocks in mosques to time prayers, in schools for lessons, even in kitchens to boil eggs just right. You're chuckling at the thought of a cook glaring at a dripping basin, muttering, "Hurry up, you lazy drop!" But seriously, these devices were lifelines, syncing a sprawling empire's pulse. The challenge, though, is keeping them accurate. You notice the clockmaker checking the water's temperature. Too warm, and it flows faster. Too cold, and it slows down. He's got a little charcoal brazier nearby, warming the room just enough. It's a delicate dance, and you're impressed by the finesse. You're also wondering how they manage this in winter, when the water might freeze. But that was a bad day at the office. Still, the drip keeps going, and you're pulled back into its rhythm. Each drop a reminder that time waits for no one, not even you.
You're still deep in the Ottoman workshop, the faint drip of water clocks echoing in the background as you shift your focus. The air hums with a different kind of energy now. Less about tools and more about the mindset that binds this craft together. You're watching a clockmaker, his eyes narrowed, hands steady, as he waits for a sand timer to finish its cycle. He's not just making a clock, he's wrestling with time itself. Patience isn't just a virtue here, it's the whole game. You feel the weight of it, like the moment before a text message sends, except this guy has been waiting for hours, maybe days, to perfect one device. Patience was the backbone of Ottoman clockmaking. By the 16th century, records show artisans spent years apprenticing, learning to control their breath, their hands, even their tempers, to master the craft. You imagine a young apprentice, fidgety and eager, being told to sit still and count grains of sand for practice. Brutal, right? But that's how they built precision. Every hourglass, every water clock demanded obsessive focus. Rush the process, and you'd end up with a timer that lies. Nobody wants to explain that to a grumpy vizier. Here's the quirky bit. Some clockmakers meditated before starting work, believing a calm mind made steadier hands. Picture them cross-legged, humming softly, probably annoying their coworkers. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual discipline or just a way to avoid screwing up expensive glass. You're leaning toward both. It's hard to stay chill when a single slip could shatter a week's work. You're watching one now, his face serene as he polishes a glass bulb, but you bet he's screaming inside. You step closer, noticing the rhythm of his movements. He's sifting sand again, checking each batch like a chef tasting broth. The sand has to flow just right, and you're starting to see why patience is non-negotiable. He measures the grains with a tiny scoop, counting them out. Yes, counting individual grains. You're half laughing, half impressed, wondering if he dreams in sandstorms. The water clock nearby needs equal care. He adjusts the drip, timing it with a small hourglass he keeps in his pocket. It's like he's got a clock to time his clock. Meta much? This patience spills into every detail. You notice the way he cleans his tools, wiping each one like it's a holy relic. The glass has to be flawless, the water pure, the measurements exact. You're thinking about how your phone's clock just ticks along, no effort required, and you're a little jealous of its laziness. But back then, time was earned. A good clockmaker could spend a whole morning calibrating one device, then start over if it wasn't perfect. You're picturing him muttering, "Close enough isn't enough," and you respect the hustle. The stakes feel high. These clocks weren't just for show. They timed everything from prayer calls to royal audiences. Mess up and you're not just late, you're disrespecting the order of the empire. You're starting to feel the pressure, like when you're rushing to meet a deadline but the Wi-Fi's out. Except here, there's no reboot button, just more sand, more water, more waiting. The clockmaker glances at you, his eyes saying, "You get it now, don't you?" And yeah, you do. Patience wasn't just part of the job, it was the job. You're wondering how they didn't lose their minds, but maybe that's the secret. They found peace in the process, in the slow, deliberate dance of sand and water.
You're stepping out of the workshop now, the scent of molten glass and damp bronze fading as you weave into the buzzing chaos of an Ottoman bazaar. The air is thick with spices, leather, and the chatter of haggling merchants. You're dodging carts piled with figs and silks, your eyes drawn to a stall where sand and water clocks gleam under flickering lanterns. This is where timekeeping meets the masses. Hourglasses small enough for a pocket, water clocks ornate enough to impress a pasha. You feel the pulse of commerce, where time isn't just measured, it's sold, bartered, and flaunted like a prize. Bazaars were the heartbeat of Ottoman trade, and by the 17th century, they were packed with timekeeping devices for every budget. You spot a merchant waving you over, holding a sand timer no bigger than an egg, perfect for timing a quick nap or a boiling pot. He's grinning, claiming it's Sultan approved, and you're rolling your eyes, but secretly charmed. These stalls were where clockmakers' creations left the workshop and entered everyday life, sinking the empire's endless hustle. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some merchants sold lucky hourglasses filled with colored sand, blue for prosperity, red for love. You're picturing a lovesick poet buying a red one, hoping it'll time his heartbreak just right. Historians still argue whether these were gimmicks or held real cultural meaning. But you're betting on a bit of both. Who doesn't want a splash of magic with their time? You're tempted to grab one yourself, just to see if blue sand brings you some extra cash. You lean in, inspecting a water clock on display. It's a beauty. Bronze, engraved with vines, the water inside catching the light like a tiny sea. The merchant brags about its accuracy, saying it's used by scholars to time debates. You're skeptical, wondering how it survives the bazaar's jostle without spilling. He shows you how it works, tilting it to start the drip, and you're hooked by the soft rhythm. It's like the workshop's patience has been bottled and sold, ready to keep someone's life on track. The crowd presses in, and you notice the variety of buyers. A baker is eyeing a cheap sand timer for his ovens. A wealthy trader is negotiating for a massive water clock to grace his courtyard. You're chuckling at the thought of the baker timing his bread with the same tech as a sultan's court. But that's the magic of the bazaar. Time is universal, and everyone's haggling for a piece of it. The merchant's voice rises, tossing in a free cloth pouch if you buy now, and you're tempted to play along just for the vibe. It's not all smooth sailing, though. You overhear a customer complaining that his hourglass runs too fast, and the merchant shrugging like, "Not my problem." You wince, imagining the clockmaker back at the workshop hearing this. Bet he'd have a fit. Quality control was tricky once these devices hit the market. Sand could clump, water could leak, and clumsy hands could break it all. You're starting to see why patience wasn't just for making clocks, but for selling them too. The merchant's still smiling though, already charming the next buyer. You admire the hustle,
even if it's a little shady. As you move through the stalls, you feel time's weight in a new way. These clocks aren't just tools, they're promises of order, of precision, of keeping up with the empire's endless pace. You're wondering what you'd buy if you lived here. A pocket hourglass for your naps, or a fancy water clock to flex on your neighbors? Either way, the bazaars got you thinking about time as a treasure, one you can hold, haggle for, and maybe even lose if you're not careful. You're slipping away from the bazaar's clamor now, the merchant shouts fading as you step into the shadow of a grand palace. The air feels heavier here, laced with incense and the weight of power. You're in the Sultan's court, where time isn't just a commodity, it's a command. You see a towering water clock in the corner, its steady drip echoing like a heartbeat, and courtiers glancing at it nervously. The Sultan's schedule runs this empire, and you're starting to feel the pressure of keeping up. One wrong move and you're late for an audience. Good luck explaining that. By the 16th century, sultans like Suleiman the Magnificent relied on precise timekeeping to govern a sprawling empire. Historical accounts describe court schedules planned to the minute, from dawn prayers to late-night war councils. You imagine a vizier sweating as he checks a sand timer, knowing the sultan's waiting. These clocks weren't just tools, they were symbols of authority. The sultan demanded time bend to his will, and clockmakers made it happen. Their devices ensured every order was executed on cue. Here's the quirky bit. Some sultans had clocks decorated with jewels to show off their wealth, but they'd still get mad if the timing was off. Picture a ruby-encrusted hourglass that runs 5 minutes fast. Fancy, but useless. Historians still argue whether these ornate clocks were functional or just status symbols, but you're betting the clockmakers prayed they worked. You're standing near one now, its glass sparkling, and you can't help but wonder if the Sultan ever noticed the sand sticking in humid weather. You watch a court attendant approach the water clock, carefully measuring the water level with a marked stick. He's whispering to himself, probably praying he doesn't spill. The clock's drip is steady, but you notice the tension in his shoulders. Timing the Sultan's day is like juggling knives. One slip, and you're in trouble. You're picturing him practicing at home, timing his own meals just to get the hang of it. It's almost funny, but then you remember the stakes. A late prayer or a delayed meeting could ripple through the empire, messing up everything from trade to troop movements. The Sultan himself sweeps into the room, his robes rustling, and you feel the mood shift. Everyone's eyes flicker to the clock, then back to him. He doesn't even glance at it. He expects time to obey. You're impressed by the confidence, but you're also thinking about the clockmakers who made this possible. Their patience, their precision, all funneled into this moment where the empire's rhythm hinges on a few drops of water or a pile of sand. You're starting to see why they were so obsessive back in the workshop. But it's not all smooth. You overhear a courtier grumbling about a sand timer that broke during a long meeting, leaving everyone guessing the hour. The Sultan wasn't pleased, and you're chuckling at the thought of him tapping his foot, waiting for someone to fix it. These devices were fragile, and you're wondering how many spares they kept on hand. Probably a whole closet full just in case. The attendant is still at the water clock, adjusting a tiny valve to keep the flow steady. You respect the grind. Keeping a sultan on schedule is no joke. As you linger, you feel time's grip tighten. The court moves like a well-oiled machine, every second accounted for, every clock a silent enforcer. You're thinking about your own day, how you rush through it without a second thought. Here, time is a master, and the sultan's its boss. You're wondering what it's like to live under that kind of pressure, where a dripping clock or a falling grain could make or break your day. Bet you double-check your hourglass before heading to work.
You're stepping out of the Sultan's court now, the weight of royal schedules fading as you wander into a quieter, dustier world. The scent of old parchment and dry earth fills your nose, and you're standing in a workshop where sand timers were born. You're holding an hourglass, its grains whispering as they fall, and you can't help but wonder where this sand came from. It's not just dirt, It's the heartbeat of Ottoman timekeeping, with roots stretching back to ancient deserts. You're about to trace that story, and it's older than you might think. Sand timers didn't start with the Ottomans. They trace back to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, around 1500 BCE, where priests used them to time rituals. By the time the Ottomans got hold of them, they'd perfected the craft, but the origins were still sacred. You picture a clockmaker sifting through piles of sand, each grain a link to those early desert temples. The Ottomans loved this connection. Sand wasn't just practical, it carried a whiff of eternity, like the dunes that outlast empires. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman clockmakers believed certain sands held spiritual power, like grains from Mecca's deserts. They'd pay a fortune for them, claiming they flowed with divine precision. You're chuckling, imagining a guy haggling over a sack of holy sand like it's a rare Pokemon card. Historians still argue whether this was piety or clever marketing, but you're leaning toward a mix of both. Either way, it made those hourglasses feel like relics, not just tools. You're watching a craftsman now, his hands steady as he pours sand into a glass bulb. He's not just dumping it in, he's testing its flow, letting it run through a tiny funnel to check its speed. Too coarse, and it jams. Too fine, and it's gone in a blink. You're impressed by the focus, like he's solving a puzzle only he can see. He mutters something about desert breath, and you're wondering if he's poetic or just sleep-deprived. The sand he's using is pale gold, sifted so fine it sparkles. You can almost taste the dust in the air, dry and warm. The process is hypnotic. He seals the glass, heating the edges until they fuse, trapping the sand forever. You're thinking about how each timer is a little world, a cycle of falling grains that starts over with a flip. It's simple but profound. And you're starting to get why the Ottomans were obsessed. These weren't just for timing prayers or meetings, they were for sailors timing shifts, merchants tracking deals, even poets measuring their musings. You're picturing a poet flipping his hourglass, muttering, "One more stanza before the sand runs out." But it's not all romantic. You notice the craftsman's frustration as he discards a batch of sand. It's too sticky, probably from a humid coastal town. He's cursing under his breath, and you're smirking at the thought of him shaking his fist at the weather. Sand was tricky like that. Unlike water, which you'll get to later, sand didn't forgive mistakes. One bad batch and the whole timer was junk. You're starting to see why those holy sands were such a big deal. Reliability was everything. As you linger, you feel the pull of history in each grain. This sand might have come from a caravan crossing the Sahara or a beach near the Red Sea. It's traveled as far as you have, maybe farther, to end up in this workshop. You're wondering what stories it could tell, what moments it's timed. The craftsman catches your eye, offering a small nod, like he knows you're starting to get it. Time isn't just measured here, it's captured, grain by grain, in a dance as old as the deserts themselves. You're back in the workshop, the faint rustle of sand still lingering as you turn your attention to a gleaming bronze contraption in the corner. It's a water clock, or clepsydra, and you're drawn to its steady drip, like a heartbeat you can't ignore. The air feels damp, and the faint glint of water catches the lamplight, pulling you into its rhythm. You're about to unravel how these devices worked, and trust me, it's more intricate than you'd expect for something that just drips. You're already wondering how anyone kept these things from leaking all over the floor. By the 16th century, Ottoman water clocks were engineering marvels, used in everything from mosques to military camps. The basic setup was simple. Water flows from one vessel to another through a tiny hole, with markers showing elapsed time. But the devil's in the details. You're watching a clockmaker adjust the flow, his fingers nimble as he tweaks a valve no bigger than a pinhead. Historical records note these clocks could measure hours with surprising accuracy, sometimes down to minutes, which was clutch for timing night prayers when stars weren't enough. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some water clocks had little floating figures, like tiny boats or birds, that rose as the water filled, acting as visual timers. You're picturing a scholar staring at a bronze duck bobbing up, thinking, time to wrap up this scroll.
Historians still argue whether these were practical or just decorative flair, but you're loving the idea of a clock that's also a mini theater. It's like the Ottoman version of a desk toy, only way cooler. You lean closer, noticing the clock's base is etched with geometric patterns, almost hypnotic in their precision. The water inside is crystal clear, filtered through layers of cloth to keep out grit. You're imagining the clockmaker's annoyance if a speck of dirt clogs the hole. Bet he'd toss the whole thing and start over. The drip rate is everything. Too fast, and your day's schedule is chaos. Too slow, and you're late for the Sultan's banquet. You're chuckling at the thought of a courtier blaming a soggy clock for his tardiness. The mechanics are a puzzle. You see the clockmaker testing the flow with a small sand timer. Yep, the sand clock you saw earlier is now timing the water clock. It's like timekeeping Inception, and you're geeking out over the layers. He's using a thin rod to measure the water level, marking it with chalk on the side. Every adjustment is a gamble, and you feel his focus, like he's threading a needle in a windstorm. The water has to be just right. Temperature, purity, even the shape of the vessel affects the flow. You're starting to respect the science behind this drip. But it's not just about function. You notice the care in the clock's design, the curves of the bronze, the way the water shimmers like it's alive. It's art as much as engineering, and you're thinking about how it must have felt to own one, like having a piece of time itself ticking away in your home. You're also wondering how they lug these things around without spilling. Probably not great for travel, unless you've got a very steady donkey. As you watch the drip, you feel time slow down. Each drop is a moment, deliberate and unhurried, tying you to the Ottoman world where patience ruled. You're picturing a clockmaker staying up late, tweaking his creation, maybe muttering, "Just one more drop." It's a grind, but it's beautiful. And you're starting to see why these clocks were treasures. They didn't just measure time, they shaped it drop by careful drop.
You're still in the workshop, the soft drip of the water clock fading into the background as you move deeper into the world of Ottoman timekeeping. The air carries the tang of metal and wax, and you're standing among a group of craftsmen, their hands busy with tools that gleam like secrets. These are the guilds of precision, the tight-knit crews who turn sand and water into the empire's heartbeat. You feel the camaraderie, the quiet pride in their work, but also the pressure. Mess up, and you're not just failing yourself, but the whole crew. You're about to see what made these guilds tick, and it's more intense than a reality show finale. By the 17th century, Ottoman clockmakers were organized into guilds, much like other artisans, with strict rules to ensure quality. Historical records show these groups controlled everything from apprenticeships to sales, keeping standards high across the empire. You imagine a young apprentice, nervous as heck, presenting his first hourglass to the guildmaster. One flaw, and he's back to sweeping floors. The guilds weren't just about craft. They were gatekeepers, ensuring every clock that left their hands could stand up to the Sultan's scrutiny or a merchant's haggle. Here's the quirky tidbit. Guild members sometimes mark their clocks with secret symbols, like a tiny crescent moon etched in the glass to prove authenticity. You're picturing a buyer squinting at an hourglass, hunting for that mark like it's a treasure map. Historians still argue whether these were anti-counterfeit measures or just guild pride, but you're betting it was a flex. Imagine the swagger of knowing your clock's got the secret handshake of the pros. You're watching a guild meeting now, the room lit with flickering oil lamps. The master's at the head, inspecting a water clock with a frown that could curdle milk. He's pointing out a drip that's off by seconds, and the craftsman's sweating like he's in a sauna. You're chuckling, but you feel for the guy. Precision here isn't optional, it's survival. The guild's rules are brutal. Every clock has to pass a test, often timed against a master device kept in the guild hall. You're imagining them all staring at sand or water, holding their breath like it's a high-stakes poker game. The training is no joke either. You see an apprentice nearby, practicing with a sand sifter, his hands shaky as he tries to match the master's speed. He's probably been at it for hours, and you're wondering if he dreams of sand piles yet. The guild teaches more than technique. It drills patience, focus, even a bit of humility. You overhear the master muttering, "Time doesn't care for your excuses," and you're nodding along. It's harsh, but it's why these clocks were so reliable, why they synced mosques, markets, and military camps across the empire. But it's not all grim. You notice the craftsman sharing a laugh over a botched glass bulb that looks more like a lumpy potato. There's a warmth here, a sense of family forged through shared obsession. The guild's a team, and you're starting to see how they pushed each other to greatness. They swapped tricks, how to smooth a glass neck, how to filter water for the perfect drip, and you're geeking out over the nerdy details. It's like a secret club for time nerds, and you're low-key jealous you can't join. As you linger, you feel the guild's legacy. These weren't just workers, they were the empire's timekeepers, crafting order from chaos. You're thinking about your own life, how you juggle deadlines and alarms. These guys did it with sand, water, and sheer will. You're wondering what it'd be like to live with that kind of focus, where every grain or drop is a testament to your skill. The master catches your eye, his nod saying, "You're starting to get it." Time's a craft, and the guild is its heart.
You're stepping out of the guild hall now, the hum of craftsmen's chatter fading as you find yourself in the cool shadow of a towering minaret. The call to prayer echoes through the air, rich and melodic, and you notice a small crowd gathered near a mosque's courtyard. Your eyes catch a glint of bronze, a water clock, its steady drip marking the time for the next prayer. You're in the heart of Ottoman spiritual life, where clocks don't just measure hours, they sync souls with the divine. The air smells faintly of rosewater, and you feel the rhythm of faith pulsing around you. In the Ottoman Empire, mosques were more than places of worship, they were community hubs, and by the 16th century, timekeeping was critical to their rhythm. Historical records show that mosques relied on water clocks and hourglasses to schedule the 5 daily prayers with precision. You picture a muezzin glancing at a sand timer, waiting for the exact moment to climb the minaret. Timing was everything. Too early or too late, and the whole community's off kilter. You're starting to feel the weight of that responsibility, like forgetting to set your alarm for an early meeting. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some mosques used massive hourglasses that could run for hours, flipped by designated timekeepers, who were basically human alarm clocks. Historians still argue whether these timekeepers were trained artisans or just trusted locals, but you're imagining a mix of both, someone with steady hands and a knack for not dozing off. You're standing closer now, watching the water clock in action. A caretaker adjusts its flow, his movements careful, almost reverent. The clock's base is carved with Arabic script, praising God's eternal nature, and you're struck by how timekeeping here feels sacred. Each drip aligns the faithful, from the baker in the market to the scholar in the madrasa. You're picturing them all pausing, turning toward Mecca as the clock dictates the moment. It's powerful, like the whole city's breathing in unison. The process isn't flawless, though. You notice the caretaker frowning as he checks the water level. Humidity's making the flow sluggish today. He adds a tiny weight to balance it, and you're impressed by the finesse, like he's tuning a guitar. You're also wondering how they managed during rainy seasons when water clocks could turn into mini fountains. Bet that was a headache. The sand timers are meanwhile less fussy, but still need a steady hand to flip them on time. You're smirking at the thought of a timekeeper tripping on his robe mid-flip, scattering sand everywhere. The mosque's courtyard buzzes with life. Kids playing, elders chatting, all moving to the rhythm of these clocks. You feel the connection, how time here isn't just personal, it's communal. The water clock's drip feels like a heartbeat, tying everyone together. You're thinking about your own routines, how your phone's calendar rules your day. These folks had bronze and sand, and somehow they made it work. You're also wondering if the timekeeper ever got bored, staring at dripping water all day. Probably not. He's got the best seat in the house for the call to prayer. As you linger, the next prayer call begins, its sound washing over you like a wave. The clock's drip seems louder now, a reminder that time in this world was a gift, measured with care to honor something bigger. You're starting to get why these clocks were so vital, not just for schedules, but for souls. The caretaker gives you a knowing look, like he's sensing you're catching on. Time's not just ticking here, it's praying. You're lingering in the mosque's courtyard, the echo of the prayer call fading as you turn your gaze back to the hourglass nearby, its sand shimmering in the sunlight. You're struck by how this simple pile of grains carries more than just time. It's heavy with meaning, woven into the Ottoman soul. You can almost feel the desert in each grain, a whisper of vast dunes and endless cycles. This isn't just a tool, it's a symbol, and you're about to dive into why sand meant so much more than a way to count minutes in this empire. By the 16th century, sand timers were everywhere in Ottoman life, from mosques to markets, and they weren't just practical, they were poetic. Historical texts describe sand as a reminder of mortality, each grain a fleeting moment in the grand sweep of existence. You picture a scholar flipping an hourglass, watching the sand fall and pondering life's brevity. It's deep, right? The Ottomans loved this vibe. Sand wasn't just dirt, it was a metaphor, tying their clocks to the eternal rhythms of the desert. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some believed the sand's color influenced its energy. Red sand for passion, white for purity. You name it, they had a story for it. You're chuckling, imagining a clockmaker selling a calming blue sand hourglass like it's an ancient life hack. Historians still argue whether these beliefs shaped clock design or were just folklore to spice up sales. But you're betting it added some flair to the bazaar pitches. Who wouldn't want a clock that vibes with their mood? You're standing closer now, watching a craftsman fill an hourglass with pale, almost silvery sand. He's muttering about its flow spirit, and you're half convinced he's making it up, but his focus is intense. The sand's been sifted for days, each grain uniform, like tiny stars. You're mesmerized by how it pours, smooth and relentless, piling into a perfect cone. It's hypnotic, and you're starting to see why the Ottomans saw something sacred in it. This isn't just timekeeping, it's a meditation, a reminder that every moment slips away. The symbolism runs deep. You notice a nearby poet scribbling, his hourglass at his side, and you wonder if he's timing his verses or just soaking in the metaphor. Sand was the desert's gift, a piece of the infinite in a fragile glass bulb. You're thinking about how the Ottomans, spread across 3 continents, used this to ground themselves. From Istanbul's bustle to Aleppo's markets, sand timers were constant, a shared language of patience and impermanence. You're picturing a merchant flipping his hourglass, muttering, "Life's short, let's close this deal." But it's not all lofty thoughts. You see the craftsman reject a batch of sand. It's too gritty, probably from a shoddy supplier. He's grumbling, and you're smirking at the thought of him arguing with a caravan trader over subpar grains. Sand symbolism didn't make it easy to work with. Humidity could clump it, and impure batches could jam the glass. You're wondering how many hours were lost just to make sure the hours were counted right. The irony's not lost on you. As you watch the sand fall, you feel its weight. Not just physical, but philosophical. It's like holding time itself, each grain a tiny lesson in letting go. You're thinking about your own life, how you chase minutes on your phone, always rushing. The Ottomans, with their sand, seem to embrace the flow, not fight it. You're starting to get it. This dance of patience and meaning. The craftsman glances at you, his eyes crinkling like he knows you're hooked. Sand's not just counting time here. It's telling a story, one grain at a time.
You're still in the workshop, the soft whisper of falling sand lingering as you shift your focus to the water clock gleaming nearby. Its steady drip pulls you in, but you're noticing something new. The faint cloudiness in the water, a hint of trouble. You're standing beside a clockmaker, his brow furrowed as he inspects the bronze vessel, muttering about leaks and sediment. Keeping these water clocks accurate was a battle against nature itself, and you're about to see why their fragile balance was as much art as science. The air feels damp, and you're wondering how anyone kept these things from turning into a soggy mess. By the 16th century, water clocks were critical in Ottoman life, especially in mosques and palaces, where precision mattered. Historical records show they were used to time everything from prayers to court sessions, but they were finicky beasts. You picture a caretaker in a mosque, anxiously checking the drip rate before dawn prayers, knowing that a single clog could throw off the whole schedule. The challenge wasn't just making the clock, it was keeping it running in a world of dust, heat, and cold. You're starting to feel the stress, like trying to keep your phone charged during a power outage. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some clockmakers added herbs to the water, believing they'd prevent algae or purify the flow. You're chuckling, imagining a clock smelling like a mint tea shop, ticking away with herbal vibes. Historians still argue whether this was practical or just a superstitious quirk, but you're betting it was a bit of both. Nobody wants a slimy clock ruining their reputation. You're picturing a clockmaker sniffing his water like a sommelier, nodding sagely at the rosemary notes. You're watching the clockmaker now, his hands steady as he dismantles the water clock's base. He's hunting for a leak, his fingers probing the seams like a detective. The vessel's polished bronze is beautiful, but you notice tiny pits where water's eaten away at the metal. He sighs, grabbing a wad of beeswax to seal the flaw. And you're impressed by the low-tech fix. It's like patching a tire with gum, but it works. You're also wondering how often these clocks sprang leaks, probably enough to make the clockmaker dream of dry days. The water itself is another headache. You see him pouring fresh water through a linen cloth, filtering out specks of dust. Impurities could clog the tiny hole, and you're picturing him cursing a grain of sand that snuck in, like the one you saw in that hourglass earlier. Temperature's a problem too. Warm water flows faster, cold water slower. He's got a small brazier nearby, keeping the room just right, and you're smirking at the thought of him babysitting the weather. It's a delicate dance, and you're starting to respect the grind of keeping time with something as fickle as water. Then there's the environment. You notice the workshop's windows are shuttered, probably to keep out humid air that could mess with the flow. You're thinking about winter, when the water might freeze solid, turning the clock into a fancy paperweight. But that was a fun day at the mosque. The clockmaker's muttering about balance, and you get it. Every drip is a negotiation with physics, patience, and a bit of luck. You're wondering how they managed in storm season, when rain might flood the whole setup. As you watch the drip resume, steady and clear, you feel the fragility of it all. Water clocks were beautiful, but they fought you every step. You're thinking about your own tech, how it glitches, but at least doesn't leak. The Ottomans wrestled time from water's whims, and you're in awe of their stubbornness. The clockmaker glances at you, his eyes tired but proud, like he knows you're starting to see the battle. Time's a slippery thing, and water's no easier to tame. You're still hovering in the workshop, the faint drip of the water clock a steady pulse as you turn your attention to a cluttered workbench. Scattered across it are tools that look like they belong in a jeweler's kit. Tiny chisels, delicate pincers, and a curved glass lens that catches the lamplight. You're standing beside a clockmaker, his hands dancing over these strange instruments, and you realize these are the secret weapons of his trade. The air smells of polished metal and oil, and you're about to uncover the gadgets that turn sand and water into time. You're already wondering how anyone could work with tools this small without losing their mind. By the 16th century, Ottoman clockmakers had developed specialized tools to craft their hourglasses and water clocks with uncanny precision. Historical accounts describe workshops filled with custom-made instruments, some passed down through generations like family heirlooms. You picture a master handing a worn pincer to his apprentice, saying, "This shaped 1,000 clocks." These tools weren't just for show. They were the difference between a timer that worked and one that got you fired by a cranky vizier. You're feeling the pressure, like trying to fix a watch with a butter knife. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some clockmakers used bird feathers to clean the tiny necks of hourglasses, believing their softness prevented scratches. You're chuckling, imagining a guy plucking a goose just to keep his glass pristine, probably muttering about feather finesse. Historians still argue whether this was practical or a weird tradition, but you're picturing a workshop floor littered with quills like a failed pillow fight. Either way, it's the kind of detail that makes you love this craft's oddball charm. You're watching the clockmaker now, his hands steady as he picks up a needle-thin probe to adjust a water clock's drip hole.
It's so small you're squinting to see it, and you're impressed he's not shaking. He's using a magnifying lens, basically an Ottoman loop, to check his work, and you're geeking out over the precision. The lens distorts his eye comically, but he's too focused to care. You're thinking about how these tools must have felt like magic back then, letting them see details finer than a grain of sand. But they'd brag about it at guild meetings. Another tool catches your eye, a tiny balance scale used to weigh sand for hourglasses. You see him measuring out grains, adjusting the pile with a flick of a spatula so small it looks like a dollhouse spoon. It's obsessive, and you're smirking at the thought of him counting grains in his sleep. But it makes sense. Too much sand and the timer runs long, too little and it's over before you blink. You're starting to see why these tools were guarded like treasure. Lose one, and you're stuck eyeballing measurements like a rookie. Then there's the glasswork. You notice a long, hollow rod he uses to blow molten glass into perfect bulbs for hourglasses. He's heating it in a small furnace, his cheeks puffed out like he's playing a trumpet. The rod's tip glows red, and you're mesmerized by the skill it takes to shape something so fragile. You're also wondering how many burns he's got from this gig, probably enough to tell stories. The tools are simple, but precise, each one a key to unlocking time's rhythm. You're picturing a clumsy apprentice dropping that rod and getting the stink eye for days. As you linger, you feel the tool's quiet power. They're not flashy, but they're the backbone of every clock in the empire. You're thinking about your own gadgets, how you take them for granted. These guys built time with pincers and feathers, and you're in awe. The clockmaker glances at you, his nod saying you're starting to get it. These tools aren't just metal and glass. They're the secrets that kept an empire ticking. You're stepping out of the workshop now, the clink of tiny tools fading as you wander into a quiet Ottoman neighborhood. The air smells of fresh bread and blooming jasmine, and you're peeking into a modest home, its windows glowing with lamplight. Inside, a family moves through their evening routine, and your eyes catch a small hourglass on a wooden table, its sand trickling steadily. This isn't a palace or a mosque. Timekeeping here is simpler, more intimate, but no less vital. You're about to see how ordinary Ottomans use sand and water clocks to keep their lives on track. And it's cozier than you expected. By the 17th century, timekeeping wasn't just for sultans or mosques. It had trickled into homes across the empire. Historical records show even middle-class families owned small hourglasses or basic water clocks, used for everything from cooking to bedtime prayers. You picture a mother flipping a sand timer to boil rice just right, or a father checking a water clock to wake his kids up for dawn prayers. These devices were like the smartphone alarms of their day, keeping households in sync with the empire's rhythm. You're feeling the warmth of it, like setting a timer for your own dinner. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some families painted their hourglasses with bright colors, believing it brought good luck to the home. You're chuckling, imagining a bright green hourglass sitting proudly next to a bowl of olives like it's part of the decor. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or just a way to make cheap timers look fancy. But you're betting it was a bit of both. Who doesn't want their kitchen clock to double as a vibe check? You're stepping closer now, watching the family's routine. The hourglass on the table is small, maybe timing a child's study session. The sand's flow is steady, and you notice the kid glancing at it, probably wishing it had run faster. You're smirking, remembering your own battles with homework timers. The mother's nearby, stirring a pot, and you're thinking about how these clocks made life manageable. No ticking gears, no batteries, just sand or water, quietly doing the job. It's simple, but you're starting to see the beauty in it. In another corner, there's a basic water clock, just a clay pot with a tiny hole and a marked bowl below. It's not as fancy as the bronze ones in the palace, but it works. You see the father check the water level, nodding as he confirms it's time for evening prayers. The setup's fragile. One bump, it's a wet floor. You're picturing a clumsy kid knocking it over, followed by a parental sigh that's universal across centuries. Maintaining these clocks was a chore. Sand could clump, water could spill, but you're impressed by how families made it work. The house feels alive, its rhythm tied to these humble devices. You notice a small hourglass by the door, probably for timing visits or chores. It's practical, but there's a quiet poetry to it, like each grain carries a piece of the family's day. You're wondering how they chose their clocks. Did they haggle for them in the bazaar you saw earlier, or inherit them like heirlooms? Either way, they're woven into the home's heartbeat. You're thinking about your own timers, how they're just apps now, and you're a little jealous of this hands-on connection to time. As you linger, you feel the intimacy of it all. These clocks weren't just tools, they were part of the family, marking moments big and small. You're picturing the mother flipping the hourglass one last time before bed, whispering, "Time to rest." It's a small act, but it grounds the whole house. The father catches your eye, his smile soft, like he knows you're getting it. Time in these homes wasn't just counted, it was cherished, grain by grain, drop by drop. You're slipping out of the cozy Ottoman home, the faint warmth of family life fading as you step back into the dusty streets, your mind still on those household clocks. Now you're standing in a bustling workshop again, the air thick with the scent of molten glass and metal. You're surrounded by hourglasses and water clocks, their sand and drips whispering in unison, and you're starting to wonder which one's better. It's like picking a favorite child. Sand or water, each has its fans, and the debate's as old as the empire itself. You're about to dive into this showdown, and it's got more drama than you'd expect from a pile of grains and a leaky pot. By the 16th century, both sand and water clocks were mainstays in Ottoman timekeeping, each with strengths that made them indispensable. Historical records show sand timers were portable and reliable, perfect for quick tasks, while water clocks could run longer and handle complex schedules like prayer times. You picture a merchant clutching a pocket hourglass for a deal, then a mosque caretaker tending a water clock for dawn prayers. Both worked, but both had quirks, and you're feeling the tension of choosing sides, like picking coffee or tea on a sleepy morning. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some clockmakers swore sand was alive, flowing with a spirit water couldn't match, while others claimed water's steady drip was the true voice of time. You're chuckling, imagining them bickering in the bazaar like it's a Marvel versus DC debate. Historians still argue whether these preferences were technical or philosophical, but you're betting it was personal pride. Nobody wants their life's work called second best. You're already picking Team Sand for its portability, but you're curious to see how this plays out. You're watching a clockmaker now, testing a sand timer against the water clock, his eyes darting between the two. The hourglass is compact, its sand flowing smoothly, no fuss. You like its simplicity. Flip it and it's ready, no leaks or refills. But it's short term, good for an hour, maybe two. You're picturing a sailor using it for watch shifts, then cursing when it runs out mid-storm. The water clock, meanwhile, is a beast, bronze, heavy, with a drip that can run for hours or days. It's perfect for mosques or palaces, but you're wincing at the thought of hauling it anywhere. Bet it's a pain to clean, too. Sand's got an edge in durability. You notice the clockmaker shaking an hourglass, checking for clumps. Humidity's the enemy, but a good seal keeps it reliable. Water clocks, though, fight a losing battle with leaks and algae. You're smirking, remembering that mint-scented water trick from the workshop. Nice try, but it's still a hassle. Sand is also easier to source. You're thinking of those desert caravans bringing sacks of holy grains. Water needs filtering, temperature control, and a steady hand to avoid spills. You're starting to see why merchants love their pocket hourglasses. But water clocks have their charm. You see the clockmaker adjust the drip, his focus intense like he's coaxing a melody from it. They're more flexible, adjust the whole, and you can time anything from a prayer to a banquet. You're imagining a sultan's court, all eyes on the water's rise, everyone moving to its rhythm. Sand can't match that longevity. You're torn, wondering which you would pick for your own life. Sand for quick tasks, water for the long haul? It's a tough call, and you're feeling the clockmaker's struggle. As you linger, you sense the debate's deeper meaning. Sand is fleeting, like life. Water's constant, like faith. The Ottomans didn't just choose tools, they chose philosophies. You're thinking about your own time, split between fleeting notifications and endless to-do lists.
The clockmaker glances at you, his smirk saying he knows you're hooked on the argument. Sand or water, it's not just about time. It's about how you live it.
You're still caught in the sand versus water debate. The workshop's hum of dripping clocks and trickling sand pulling you deeper into the craft. You're standing beside a clockmaker now, his hands moving with a precision that borders on obsession. He's calibrating an hourglass, counting each grain's fall like it's a sacred ritual, then checking a water clock's drip with the same intensity. You're starting to see that mastery here isn't just about making clocks, it's about perfecting their rhythm down to the smallest fraction of time. The air smells of wax and metal, and you're about to dive into the art of calibration, where patience isn't just a skill, it's a way of life. By the 16th century, Ottoman clockmakers were known for their obsessive calibration, ensuring their devices matched the empire's demanding schedules. Historical records describe artisans spending hours, sometimes days, fine-tuning a single clock to align with astronomical observations or master timepieces. You picture a clockmaker hunched over his workbench, timing his hourglass against the stars, his eyes bleary but unyielding. It's intense, like trying to sync your playlist to a workout without missing a beat. Except here, a misstep could mess up a sultan's day. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some clockmakers use their own heartbeats to calibrate short intervals, counting pulses to match the sand's flow. You're chuckling, imagining a guy pressing a finger to his wrist, muttering, 1, 2, skip the coffee next time. Historians still argue whether this was a legit technique or just a desperate trick when tools failed. But you're loving the image of a clockmaker turning his own pulse into a metronome. It's raw, human, and a little wild. You're watching the clockmaker now, his hands steady as he adjusts the neck of an hourglass. He's using a tiny file to shave the glass, making the opening just a hair wider. The sand flows a touch faster, and he nods, satisfied. You're mesmerized by the precision. It's like he's sculpting time itself. He tests it against a master hourglass, one kept in a velvet-lined box like it's the crown jewel. You're thinking about how that master timer probably outlasted empires, quietly ticking away in some guild hall. Bet it's seen some stories. The water clock's next, and you see the challenge. He's tweaking a valve, barely a pinprick, to slow the drip. He's counting drops with a small sand timer. Yep, that sand clock you saw earlier is pulling double duty. It's like watching a chef perfect a recipe, except one wrong move and the whole day is off. You're picturing him staying up late, muttering, just one more drop, while his family begs him to sleep. The water's clarity matters too. Any sediment, and it's game over. You're wincing at the thought of a speck of dirt ruining a week's work. Temperature is another headache. You notice a small brazier nearby, keeping the room steady so the water doesn't speed up or freeze. He's also checking the sand's dryness, shaking the hourglass to ensure no humidity's crept in. You're impressed by the paranoia. Every detail's a potential traitor. You're wondering how he stays sane, repeating these rituals day after day. Maybe it's the rhythm, the satisfaction of nailing it. You're starting to feel it too, the pull of getting time just right. As you linger, you sense the weight of calibration. It's not just about clocks, it's about control, about taming time in a world that doesn't stop. You're thinking about your own life, how you chase perfect timing, meetings, deadlines, that perfect coffee break. These clockmakers lived for it. Their every tweak a small victory. The clockmaker glances at you, his eyes sharp, like he knows you're starting to get the obsession. Time's a beast, and he's taming it, one grain, one drop at a time. You're stepping away from the workshop's meticulous rhythm, the clockmaker's precise tweaks fading as you find yourself in a very different scene. The air is thick with dust and the sharp tang of sweat, and you're standing in an Ottoman military camp, tents stretching across a sun-scorched plain. Soldiers bustle around you, sharpening swords and checking supplies.
but your eyes catch a glint of glass, an hourglass dangling from a commander's belt. Time isn't just a luxury here, it's a weapon, and you're about to see how sand and water clocks kept the Empire's armies marching in sync. You're already wondering how they managed in the chaos of war without everything breaking. By the 16th century, Ottoman military campaigns relied heavily on timekeeping to coordinate movements across vast distances. Historical records describe commanders using portable hourglasses to time marches, sieges, and even cannon reloads. You picture a grizzled officer flipping a sand timer during a battle, shouting orders as the grains fall, every second critical. It's intense, like trying to time a sprint while dodging arrows. These clocks weren't just for show. They ensured troops moved as one from the Balkans to Baghdad. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some soldiers tied tiny hourglasses to their saddles, believing the sand's flow brought luck in battle. You're chuckling, imagining a cavalryman patting his timer like a talisman, whispering, "Don't fail me now, sand." Historians still argue whether this was superstition or a practical way to track short intervals, but you're betting it was a bit of both. War's chaotic, and a little luck, real or not, probably felt good on the battlefield. You're watching a commander now, his face weathered as he checks a water clock set up near his tent. It's a rugged version, made of toughened clay to survive the march, but it's still delicate. He's counting drips to time a night watch, his eyes scanning the horizon for scouts. You're impressed with the focus, like he's reading the future in those drops. The clock's simple, just a pot with a hole and a marked bowl, but it's keeping the camp's rhythm. You're picturing a sleepy soldier forgetting to refill it, then facing the commander's wrath. Bet that was a long night. Sand timers are everywhere too. You see a group of archers using one to time their practice volleys, the sand's flow setting the pace. It's portable, tough enough to handle a bumpy ride, and you're starting to see why they were a soldier's best friend. Water clocks, though, are trickier. You notice the commander's aide refilling the clay pot, filtering water through a cloth to keep it clean. One splash, and the timing's off. Not great when you're planning an ambush. You're smirking at the thought of a soldier tripping over a tent peg and soaking the clock. Oops. The stakes are high. You overhear a messenger reporting troop movements, timed to the minute with an hourglass. A miscalculation could mean missing a rendezvous or walking into a trap. You're thinking about how your own plans hinge on timing. Meetings, flights, even catching a bus. These guys did it with sand and water in the middle of war. You're wondering how they kept it together under pressure, dust swirling and enemies lurking. The commander flips his hourglass again, and you feel the tension. Every grain's a countdown to action. As you linger, you sense time's grip on the camp. These clocks weren't just tools, they were lifelines, sinking soldiers across miles of chaos. You're picturing the commander at dawn, checking his water clock, ready to march. The aide gives you a nod, like he knows you're getting it. Time in war isn't just measured, it's fought for, grain by grain, drop by drop.
You're pulling away from the military camp's dust and tension, the clatter of swords fading as you step back into a familiar workshop. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of molten glass and charcoal, and your eyes are drawn to a delicate hourglass taking shape in a craftsman's hands. The glass glows faintly, its curves catching the lamplight like a jewel, and you realize this isn't just a tool, it's a work of art. You're about to dive into the artistry of glasswork in Ottoman sand timers, where beauty and precision dance together. You're already wondering how they made something so fragile look so flawless. By the 16th century, Ottoman glassmakers were renowned for their skill, crafting hourglasses that were as stunning as they were functional. Historical records praise their ability to create thin, perfectly symmetrical bulbs that could withstand the heat of sand and the test of time. You picture a glassblower, sweat beading on his brow, shaping molten glass with a hollow rod, each puff of breath a gamble. These weren't just timers, they were showpieces, gracing palaces, mosques, and even wealthy homes like the ones you saw earlier. You're feeling the pride in every curve, like crafting a masterpiece that also counts minutes. Here's the quirky tidbit.
Some artisans etched tiny poems or prayers into the glass, believing the words blessed the timer's accuracy. You're chuckling, imagining a buyer squinting at a miniature verse about time's fleeting nature, probably thinking, cool, but does it work? Historians still argue whether these inscriptions were spiritual or just a way to jack up the price, but you're betting they added some serious swagger to the bazaar stalls. It's like buying a clock with a built-in fortune cookie. You're watching the glassblower now, his movements hypnotic as he spins the rod, coaxing the molten blob into a perfect bulb. The furnace roars, and you're wincing at the heat, wondering how he's not melting himself. The glass is paper thin, almost glowing, and you're mesmerized by its fragility. He shapes the neck with a tiny tool, maybe one of those secret ones you saw earlier, pinching it just right so the sand will flow smoothly. You're thinking about how one wrong move could crack the whole thing, and you're suddenly nervous for him. Bet he's got stories of shattered dreams. The artistry isn't just in the shape. You notice him painting a delicate vine pattern on the cooled glass, using a brush so fine it looks like a single hair. It's not just decoration, it's a signature, proof of his skill. You're picturing this hourglass in a sultan's court, catching eyes as much as it counts time, maybe even outshining that jeweled one you heard about. The sand inside, pale and fine, seems to glow through the glass, and you're starting to see why these were treasures. It's like holding a piece of the desert, framed in art. But beauty comes with pain. You overhear the glassblower grumbling about a cracked bulb, ruined after hours of work. He tosses it aside, and you're wincing, imagining the sting of starting over. The glass has to be perfect. No bubbles, no weak spots, or the sand could leak, or the whole thing could shatter. You're wondering how many tries it took to get it right, how many nights he stayed up cursing the furnace. Probably enough to make him dream in glass shards. As you linger, you feel the magic of this craft. These hourglasses weren't just tools, they were statements, blending form and function in a way that feels almost modern. You're thinking about your own gadgets, how they're sleek but soulless. This glass, this sand, it's got soul. The glassblower catches your eye, his nod tired but proud, like he knows you're hooked. You're starting to get it. Artistry here wasn't just about beauty. It was about capturing time in something you could hold, something that could take your breath away.
You're stepping away from the glowing glass of the hourglass workshop, its delicate artistry still lingering in your mind as you return to the familiar hum of a clockmaker's domain. The air carries the faint dampness of water and the tang of bronze, and your eyes settle on a water clock. It's dripped slower now, almost hesitant. You're standing beside a clockmaker, his hands still as he stares at the device with a mix of resignation and respect. Water clocks, once the pride of Ottoman timekeeping, are fading, giving way to clunky mechanical gears that tick instead of drip. You're about to witness their decline, and it feels like saying goodbye to an old friend. By the late 17th century, mechanical clocks from Europe were creeping into the Ottoman Empire, their springs and pendulums stealing the spotlight from water and sand. Historical records show that while water clocks were still used in mosques and palaces, wealthy elites began favoring imported mechanical timepieces for their novelty and precision. You picture a merchant in the bazaar showing off a shiny pocket watch, while a water clock gathers dust in his shop. It's bittersweet, like swapping a vinyl record for a streaming app. Newer, but not quite the same soul. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some die-hard clockmakers tried to upgrade water clocks with mechanical parts, creating bizarre hybrids that look like steampunk experiments. You're chuckling, imagining a dripping pot strapped to a gear wheel, probably confusing everyone who saw it. Historians still argue whether these were serious innovations or desperate attempts to stay relevant. But you're picturing a clockmaker muttering, "If you can't beat 'em, bolt 'em together." It's a wild image, and you're kind of rooting for those quirky contraptions. You're watching the clockmaker now, his hands gentle as he cleans the water clock's bronze basin.
There's a tenderness in his movements, like he knows its days are numbered. The drip is steady, but you notice faint corrosion on the metal, a sign of wear that no amount of wax can fix. He's muttering about the new mechanical clocks, how they break down in heat and need constant winding. You're smirking, thinking about how your own tech needs updates every 5 minutes. Guess some things never change. Still, the water clock's simplicity feels timeless, even if its time is running out. The shift wasn't sudden. You overhear the clockmaker talking about how mosques still rely on water clocks for prayers, their long-running drips perfect for sacred schedules. But in homes and markets, mechanical clocks are winning. You're picturing a family like the one you saw, swapping their clay water pot for a ticking box that sounds like a restless cricket. It's practical, sure, but you're wondering if they missed the soft drip, the way it felt like a living thing. The bazaars changing too. Fewer water clocks on display, more gears and chains catching the light. The decline's practical side hits hard. You notice the clockmaker's tools, some gathering dust as he spends less time on water clocks. They're high maintenance. Leaks, algae, temperature swings, all those headaches you saw earlier. Mechanical clocks, for all their faults, don't spill or freeze. You're thinking about how progress always has a cost, like trading a horse for a car. The clockmaker sighs, and you feel the weight of it, an era slipping away, drop by drop. As you linger, you sense the water clock's quiet defiance. It's still dripping, still measuring time with the same grace it always has. You're thinking about your own world, how tech comes and goes, each upgrade burying something older. The clockmaker catches your eye, his nod soft, like he knows you're feeling the loss. Water clocks may be fading, but their rhythm, their patience, still echo in the empire's heartbeat. You're starting to get it. Time moves on, but some things leave ripples that last.
You're still in the workshop, the faint drip of the fading water clock lingering like a whisper as you step back, taking in the hum of sand and glass around you. The air carries the warmth of a dying furnace, and you're surrounded by hourglasses, their grains falling in silent rhythm. You're starting to feel the weight of the clockmaker's legacy, not just their tools or techniques, but the patience that defined their craft. It's a lesson that feels almost alive, reaching across centuries to nudge you in the ribs. You're about to reflect on how their obsession with precision shaped an empire, and maybe even offers something for your own chaotic life. By the 16th and 17th centuries, Ottoman clockmakers were the unsung heroes of an empire that spanned 3 continents, their sand and water clocks syncing everything from prayers to battles. Historical records highlight their role in maintaining order, ensuring that mosques, markets, and military camps moved to the same beat. You picture a clockmaker like the one you've been watching, his hands steady, knowing his work held the empire together. It's humbling, like realizing your barista's perfect pour is why your morning doesn't implode. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some clockmakers left tiny flaws in their work on purpose, believing perfection belonged only to God. You're chuckling, imagining a guy sneaking a slightly off-center glass neck into an hourglass, winking at the heavens like, "This one's for you." Historians still argue whether this was a religious practice or an excuse for human error, but you're leaning toward faith. It fits the poetic vibe of sand as a symbol of mortality. Either way, it's a reminder that even masters knew their limits. You're watching the clockmaker now, his hands slower, maybe tired, as he seals a new hourglass. The sand flows perfectly, and you're struck by how much patience went into this single piece. Every grain sifted, every drip tested, every tool cleaned. It's a marathon of focus. You're thinking about the guilds you saw, the apprentices counting heartbeats, the glassblowers battling heat. Their patience wasn't just skill, it was a mindset, a way of wrestling time into submission. You're wondering if you could borrow a bit of that calm for your own to-do list, always buzzing like an angry bee. This legacy isn't just about clocks. You feel it in the rhythm of the empire itself. Mosques calling at dawn, soldiers marching at dusk,
families flipping hourglasses at dinner. The clockmakers' patience made that possible. Their quiet work a foundation for a world that never stopped moving. You're picturing the bazaar, the sultan's court, the military camp, all tied together by sand and water. It's like they wove a net of time, catching moments before they slipped away. You're starting to see why their craft mattered so much. It wasn't just about hours, it was about order, meaning, life. But it's not all rosy. You notice the clockmaker's worn tools, the faint cracks in his workbench, signs of a long grind. Patience came at a cost. Sleepless nights, ruined batches, maybe even doubts about whether it was worth it. You're thinking about your own grind, how you push through tasks, chasing deadlines. The clockmakers didn't have apps or hacks. They had discipline, and you're a little jealous of that focus. You're wondering what it'd be like to slow down, to treat each moment like a grain of sand, deliberate and precious. As you linger, you feel the clockmaker's lesson sinking in. Patience isn't just waiting, it's crafting, building, believing in the long game. You're picturing the hourglass in that family's home, the water clock in the mosque, still ticking in your memory. The clockmaker catches your eye, his nod quiet, like he knows you're carrying this with you. Their legacy isn't just in glass or bronze. It's in the idea that time, handled with care, can hold an empire, or maybe just your day, together.
You're standing in the workshop one last time. The soft trickle of sand and the faint drip of water blending into a quiet symphony. The air feels cooler now, the lamplight softer, as if the world itself is slowing down. You're surrounded by hourglasses and water clocks, each one a testament to the Ottoman clockmakers' craft, their patience etched into every grain and drop. You're about to connect their world to yours, to see how their dance with time echoes in the modern hum of your own life. It's a bridge across centuries, and you're already feeling the pull of their legacy, like a gentle tug on your sleeve. By the 16th century, Ottoman clockmakers had mastered the art of measuring time with sand and water, creating a rhythm that held an empire together. Historical records show their clocks were more than tools. They were the pulse of a society, from mosques to military camps to humble homes like the ones you visited. You picture a clockmaker, maybe the one you've been watching, knowing his work synced the world. It's not so different from your own life, where alarms and calendars dictate your day. You're starting to see the thread. Time's still the boss, whether it's sand or a smartphone screen. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman poets compared life to an hourglass, saying each grain was a chance to live better. You're chuckling, imagining a motivational poster in a bazaar stall. Seize the sand. Historians still argue whether this inspired clock designs or just reflected the era's obsession with time's fleeting nature. But you're loving the vibe. It's like a reminder to slow down, to savor each moment before it slips through. Kind of like how you're lingering in this story now. You're watching the clockmaker one last time, his hands steady as he sets a finished hourglass on the bench. The sand flows smoothly, and you're struck by its quiet beauty, like a tiny desert caught in glass. You're thinking about how these clocks shape lives. Merchants timing deals, soldiers timing marches, families timing prayers. It's not so far from your world, where you time workouts, meetings, even coffee breaks. The tools have changed, but the need to wrestle time into order hasn't. You're wondering if you'd have the patience to sift sand or tweak drips, or if you just rage quit and check your phone. The connection feels deeper now. You notice the clockmaker's worn fingers, the faint smile as he admires his work. His patience, his focus, it's a lesson you can almost touch. You're picturing the bazaar, the mosque, the military camp, all pulsing to the rhythm he set. Your own life feels like that sometimes, a rush of moments you try to pin down.
Maybe the Ottoman clockmakers knew something you're still learning. Time's not just counted, it's crafted, with care, with intention. You're starting to think about your next day, how you might slow down, treat each minute like a grain that matters. As the workshop fades, you feel the weight of their legacy settle. Sand and water, patience and precision, they built more than clocks. They built a way of seeing time. You're carrying that with you, a quiet nudge to move with purpose, not just speed. The clockmaker's gone now, but his nod lingers, like he knows you're taking this home. Now let's ease you into sleep. Picture yourself back in that Ottoman workshop, but it's quieter now. The lamps dimmed to a soft glow. The hourglasses are still, their sand settled in gentle mounds, like tiny dunes under moonlight. The water clock's drip slows, each drop a long, soothing note, fading into silence. You're sinking into your bed, the world softening around you, the hum of time growing distant. Those clockmakers, with their patient hands, remind you that time doesn't rush when you're at peace. Let their rhythm carry you, each grain, each drop, a whisper that tomorrow will wait. Close your eyes, feel the calm settle, and drift into the quiet where time is just a gentle flow. Sweet dreams.